Hey, everybody, welcome. I think this is the 79th week. I've lost track, but anyway, we've got plenty of things to talk about, and we'll see if Jack shows up. He's probably in some sort of client meeting that actually pays him, but hopefully he'll join us too. But I'm wearing the crazy shirt from Crazy Shirts. Thanks to Scott Sutherland, and because we've got crazy things going on that we need to talk about and hopefully help you navigate as a business owner and a business leader of a privately held company, but also because Scott had a question on PPP too. Like, yeah, there are still questions about that evidently. So we will be happy to help you, but thank you, Scott. I love this shirt. As you guys are coming on, questions, use the Q&A, please. And you can harass us on the chat. And we always have some notables that take advantage of that. And it wouldn't be fun without them. So, Adam, so I know we're going to be covering vax mandates. Like, what does that mean? What are some of the implications? Hopefully, Jack will get on here as soon as possible, too, because we are going to definitely want his input.
Yeah.
Because we didn't even stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so we aren't experts in any of that. But Adam does a pretty good impersonation of a good lawyer. But and then we will talk about Ways and Means Committee. I just printed off some stuff from our website that Jamie Davis did a really good job giving a good synopsis of some stuff that looks like it's going to probably come roaring down the pike. So Adam, why don't you go ahead and take it?
Yeah, so I sound way worse than I feel, and I do not have COVID. I tested negative, but apparently you can still get sick from other stuff. So this is, if anybody has any kids that went to Carolina, there's a rumor about the Glanville Towers crud, and apparently I have it. So Jack, I guess,
no.
So he came back with it, and then gave it to Miles, and we went to Savannah to drop off my son. In my egocentric, I can't possibly get sick of anything, as I'm eating his leftover grilled cheese and Cheez-Its.
Oh no.
Yeah, get what you get. So wow, I haven't felt this way in a couple of years. But anyway, couple of things that came out. We're going to talk about the vaccine mandate with the over 100 employees that came out. What's also in there is that it was mandatory for healthcare workers, educational workers. I've heard rumors that CMS is going to go to a mandatory vaccine or submission to a testing regime. So I think, in general, that's really going to be Jack's department to opine in on. But, my own feeling is that, probably, as Jack has pointed out, it's going to be the right of the employer to say you have to do stuff. And if then you just end up deciding that you don't want to do it, then as a libertarian, the libertarian viewpoint would be you vote with your feet. You just get, you get a different job at somewhere that doesn't require a vaccine mandate, or you do something different. So I just feel like, vaccine mandates in general, it's Jack's department, but I would say probably here to stay and probably will be upheld in court. So I think there's a whole different story in terms of like, I'm over 100 employees, but normally have not been subject to OSHA inspections. How are they even going to enforce that? I'm over 100 employees, but it's a completely virtual workforce. What does it matter? I mean, like, there's lots of questions that I've got about the government imposing a mandate that I'm sure Jack can get into. That's your time to stall, Jack. But I think in general, as an employer, probably if you want to enforce a vaccine mandate or testing, you're going to have the right to do so. And if you don't want to enforce it, you probably got the right to do that, because it seems like that the general rulings so far have been, well, the employee doesn't have to work there if they don't want to. So if the employee doesn't feel safe because they're in a population of unvaccinated, vote with your feet, get a different job. If, on the other hand, the employee doesn't feel safe because they don't feel safe about getting the vaccine, I think the court's position have generally been vote with your feet, get a different job. You don't have to work there. So, I think, probably for our clients on the phone or on the webinar, it's just time to start thinking about, well, what's your policy going to be? Because you're probably going to have to, at some point, somebody's going to get asked. I mean, I know that people have started asking me, and that usually is a leading indicator about what we're going to do at BGW. And my answer is don't know yet, but that's usually a leading indicator of probably going to need to make a decision sometime in the next quarter to 2 quarters as to what our position is. So with that in mind, on to tax policy. We did send out the blog, and all of a sudden I got all these texts saying, oh my God, am I going to have to pay higher taxes right now? So first off, it's just a proposal. So they're in the process of voting on the proposal now. What this is, if everybody remembers, the Senate passed this massive, Senate passed 2 bills. One was an infrastructure bill that was a little over $1 billion that had bipartisan support. The second was a bill that was passed with only Democratic support for, $3 some odd trillion. It's gone over to the House. The House has said we'll work on passing both. And what has gone through the House Ways and Means Committee is the way to pay for the $3.5 trillion infrastructure package, because there wasn't, enforcement was the punchline of how to pay for the smaller infrastructure package. So this is the House working on the process of, well, how are we going to pay for this? And what's this going to look like in terms of reconciling with the Senate proposal on how to pay for this? So, I don't, someone keep me honest. I don't think I ever said there wasn't going to be some pain. I think I just said it wasn't going to be as bad as we all rushed out and thought, oh my God, So so I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's bad. It's tax increase, but it's not as bad as, Biden's campaign tax proposal. So, the punchline for the clients that we have that are going to be impacted, on the corporate income tax rate, which would apply to our C corporations, and then also our S corporations and partnerships, there is a tax rate increase. I think the goal of the Trump tax proposal was to get some balance between the corporate tax rate on a C corporation and then the rate on flow-through entities, and to keep those kind of indexed together. My read is that they're still trying to do that. So basically, the way they're going to do that is that C corporation tax rates are going to go up. They're actually going to go down if you're below 400 grand, but they're going to go up if you're between 400 and 5 million by around 5%, a little over 5%. But then on the qualified business income side, there's just a cap, like the maximum that you can use to pay an 80 cents on the dollar move is at $500,000 in income. I'm married, filing jointly. So I look at it as that's their way of keeping parity between, $400,000 C corp and below a $500,000 flow through income business. That's their way of keeping parity. So that's gonna hit our clients. We kind of figured there'd be something around that. So what's that translate into? Probably an effective, 3 or 4% tax rate increase if you're making north of 400 or 500. The second thing that's going to hit is on high income earners, which generally is in the $400,000 to $500,000 range. The top rate is going to go up by 2% or so. That's going to impact our clients. The other thing that's going to go into place is that on business income, there will still be a surtax like there is on a W-2. So that's going to go up. So all in, if I'm an S corporation making $800,000-900,000. It's a lot of money, but if I'm an S corporation making $800,000 to $900,000, I think this proposal represents probably about a 10% tax rate increase for you when it's all said and done. The other big thing that was in here on capital gains tax, that didn't end up as bad as we would have thought, or as Biden proposed. Basically, on transactions greater than $1 million, it would go up by 5%. Income levels greater than $1 million, it would go up by 5%. Every proposal I just talked about is effective next year, with the exception of the capital gains tax rate increase, which in theory is effective September 13th. There's also a surcharge for high income earners of 3%. So that's people married filing jointly at $5 million or $2.5 million if you're single. There's some other stuff to retirement plans, but that's kind of the biggest stuff that'll impact our clients. The other thing is, on the estate tax, which we've been harping on, it was featured in the last webinar. They didn't make it official. They're accelerating the rollback on the estate tax to the pre-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act level. So they're going to cut it back. They're going to cut it in half to let it go back to what it was originally. That's one thing. The other thing too is that I thought was real interesting that didn't get a lot of press is that a lot of times we have clients put stuff in a revocable trust as a way of gifting to avoid estate tax. If you've got too much control still though in that irrevocable trust, they're saying, oh, nay, it's still included in your estate. So it means that estate planning's got to be a little bit more careful when it comes to voting, non-voting shares. How much control does the person making the gift still retain versus you actually have a third party trustee that's voting the shares, stuff like that. So there's some work to do. Again, it's not the end of life on earth as we know it, because as we all will remember that under Ronald Reagan, the top marginal rate was 80%. So, this is top marginal rate goes up by a couple percentage points, and overall for our clients that make north of $500,000, probably going to represent, once you get to $1 million, maybe a 10% increase for you. So it's not great, but it's not the end of the world.
Well, we've got a bunch of good questions that have already come in, but I want Jack to go ahead and weigh in. But this came in from the chat from CJ. Their son is in Granville too and had the crud last week. So Adam, misery loves company.
Yeah.
Jack, you got anything?
Sure. So one comment about what's been happening in Congress or in the House with respect to where they're at as far as the and I lost it. I had it on my screen. Don't know where it went. But basically it was that they're making progress towards moving along the money and the passage of it. And it went from, I think it was the House Ways and Means Committee. They got most of the 3.5 trillion. They've worked through the language. And this is a report as of yesterday, and that they are at a point where, they're kind of putting in the different pieces, et cetera. So it may be the case that they make it, or they make that deadline to, the end of the month to be able to have some package together. And of course, people are weighing in. But the point of that update was that they are making forward progress on navigating through all of the bits and pieces, the pork and everything else that's going into the bill. With respect to the mandate, rather than going into, it's 11:15, rather than going into the official, well, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway, because I have it up here. I'm going to do my news report. Right.
Oh, but you're back in Charlotte.
I am.
What happened to DC?
I got caught and they kicked me out. So
at least you're not in jail. That's good.
Well, I had to work my way out. See, the thing is, I actually have like a funny quick story. So I have a black Tahoe, and until they redesigned it last year, when I drove through Washington, D.C., I looked like every other other vehicles there. And so I was with my wife and kids, and we were at the Lincoln Memorial, and I had parked in this spot behind these other black SUVs. And I told the kids to go and get they wanted a night picture of the memorial. Like, you can't park here. I'm like, yes, I can. No one's going to bother me as long as they don't see the back with the stickers. I look like everyone else. And so, so I escaped in my black Tahoe from DC last week. So it's all good. All right. So here we go. The official report. So live back from Charlotte, I'm Jack Santaniello. This is Shoemaker News. In arguably the most far-reaching move of COVID-19 pandemic, the Biden administration announced yesterday that federal workplace safety officials will soon issue a rule that will require all employers with 100 or more employees to either ensure their workers are vaccinated or require unvaccinated employees to produce a weekly negative test result before coming to work. Businesses will also be required to give workers paid time off to get vaccinated and to recover from any vaccine side effects as part of the forthcoming emergency rule expected from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. As of September 10th, in a webinar, the Labor Department officials stated that while employers must provide paid time off for employees to receive and or to recover from the vaccine, employers could require employees to use their existing paid time off for this purpose. So that's the official introduction to it. I want to take a quick side step or on a parallel course, which is, so we're talking about private employers, and I'll get back to that in a second, but parallel courses for federal employees. And that there was a mandate that was put into or put in motion last Thursday or Friday, after we had our conversation last week at 11 o'clock. And this affects approximately 4 million federal employees and workers on government contracts. So, if you're a contractor and you're working on a government contract, that could also impact you and your company in relation to this mandate, which I don't think was really, when you hear about this, I don't know if that if that was bridged together in that discussion, because I was like, oh yeah, it makes sense that would be the case, but no one's actually, I've heard say that. The way it works is federal workers have roughly 75 days to get themselves vaccinated. So that clock has already started moving. And the federal mandate includes limited exceptions for legally recognized reasons, such as disability or religious exceptions, which you've heard from us before say that those are really kind of the two main exceptions with respect to having any type of mandates with respect to vaccine or mask and things like that. So going back to the workplace mandate, vaccine mandate. So you may be thinking, well, how can this happen? How can they force us to do this? And, regardless of whether you're talking about mask and vaccines in schools, and you've probably seen news reports of teachers resigning. I heard this morning a report about healthcare workers resigning, and it's people that are on both sides of it. So it's one of those things where no matter what an employer does, it's a lose scenario, because you're going to have people that are very adamant on either side. So whether you enforce it and tell them you have to get vaccinated and wear a mask, you have a problem. If you're a little bit looser and you say, well, it's voluntary, you're going to have people that say, well, I'm not going to go into that workspace because it's dangerous to me and to my family. So, and we've seen the experimental microcosms of that. Look what's happening in Mecklenburg County and Union County with respect to the schools systems and in other places. Look at the Mecklenburg County government, who, as of today, there are people that are sitting home on their couches and have been told, don't come to work and you're not getting paid. So it's impacting all of us. So back to the workplace mandate. It is 100 plus employees, and this is expected to impact 80 million workers, or basically 2/3 of the country's workforce. The way it works is they have this emergency temporary standard, ETS. So if you hear that term, that's what that means, and allows OSHA to enact regulations under the protections of the public essentially. And the standard is that they can put in force regulations that it can enforce immediately if grave danger, that's the key buzzword, buzz phrase, grave danger to worker safety is present. And covered employers who ignore the standard could face citations and penalties up to $14,000 per violation. Employers that are covered, it's very broad based, but there's a comment that there are employers who don't normally deal with OSHA issues that would be covered by this. Law firms in particular, CPA firms in particular. I mean, depending on the size of your employment force, it could be that you're impacted. So what's the timing? Well, while all this is in motion and the federal mandate for federal workers is in place and the timer is ticking, the timer doesn't start on the 100 plus employee workforce until they actually get it through a certain process. And then it's expected that there will probably be a similar 75-day period, because that's where they're using on the federal worker side of things. But the proposal will have all those details. The temporary measure can only last for 6 months, and then it has to go through a formal rulemaking process, meaning that the federal government has to get involved, likely congressional hearings and those kind of things. Remote employees likely are not going to be covered if they don't come into the workplace. And again, a lot of this is speculation until we get what the actual rule is. But so it is anticipated that remote workers are not covered. That how do you count the 100 people? Is it per office? There's speculation that it'll be company-wide, so multiple locations, not just at a single location. Proof of vaccination, that and how long do you have to keep those records? I didn't know this, that OSHA's record retention regulations require that employers preserve and maintain employee medical records for the duration of employment plus 30 years. So 3 decades. You have to hold on to this information, right? I didn't know that. Maybe to the disappointment of my employment law partners, but didn't know. All right. Okay. So more to come. Which test will be required? They're not sure. The rapid test is less reliable. The full test takes a couple days. So what's the trade-off there? Who pays for testing? That's a great question. It's like, oh, we're going to impose all this stuff, and who pays for the testing? So far, the government has been paying for some of the testing. Your private insurance has been paying for some of the testing, and you've been paying yourself for some of the testing out of pocket if you have deductibles. So all kinds of variations. Again, they punted that to say more to come. And the last comment is, will the ETS face legal challenges? Which is kind of a rhetorical, dumb question. Of course it is. And, for all the things that I've just said for the last few minutes, it's like, okay, no matter which way you zig or zag, there's going to be legal challenges on both sides. And so, is it a grave danger? I mean, going back to the fundamental issue, is it a grave danger? Do they even have the power to do this? And then if they have the power, what's the extent of their power to do it? Who's going to pay? What's the impact on businesses? And so things like that. So it's, we're in, as I said before, very interesting times. Sometimes maybe I think maybe I should have been a litigator, and I'd have my workflow filled for the next 2 or 3 years, definitely, right? So, but just again, if you to give you guys, all of you, some background on terminology and kind of what's out there recently, but it's going to impact all of us. It's going to impact our kids via teachers and our older adults, parents, etc. So these are some pretty big medical issues, notwithstanding the financial issues that Adam has touched on with respect to taxes and who's going to pay for all of the other stuff and ongoings in relation to COVID and workforce. So that's my summary for the week.
That's really good. One of the reasons I specifically like having you on here, Jack, is the fact that you are not a litigator. No disrespect to all the litigators out there, but I really like that. And you're very thorough. It's interesting because I was looking at all the questions that we had in the kind of the teaser post, you pretty much nailed every one of them. With the exception of states' rights. I don't know. Did you hit that in your litany?
I didn't, but there is, so, and I also did not know this, but there are certain states that are not required to follow OSHA regulations because they have their own set of regulations related to occupational safety and health, which meet or exceed the federal regulations. So they would have to comply with that. And there are others who are subject to the federal regulations. So, there is, I don't think there'll be necessarily a challenge to jurisdiction, that the feds have jurisdiction. Generally speaking, I think that the challenge starts at, does this rise to the level of what they are able to regulate, just generally speaking, as a regulatory agency? So it's kind of the same issue from a different perspective. Is it a constitutional issue, state rights issue, or is it necessarily that it is within the mandate of the federal regulatory agency to begin with? And again, interrelated, they kind of one off the other, but from different perspectives. And it could be that the answer to one is yes, and the answer to the other is no, which further complicates the issue and doesn't get us any closer to resolution.
Yeah. And I think in your extremely good overview, you answered one of David's question, which was, I've been told that employees who are not classified as exempt, the employer has to pay for the test. Is that correct? Again, speculation, but we don't know, right?
We don't. And obviously the insurance industry is going to have some say in that, and wanting to, okay, well, wait a minute, you're forcing something upon us that is really a contractual issue between us and our insureds. And then you have a whole layer of state regulation with respect to insurance, the insurance industry, which is on a state by state basis. And then you have federal layer as well. So that's why it's, we can only speak in kind of teasers because first of all, we don't know a lot yet. And then there's just so many fingers and issues into the process that, to sort through it. At some point, from my perspective, it's kind of like mental exhaustion and fatigue. It's like, all right, good enough. We just gotta, and people get impatient. It's like, okay, you're holding this up because of these things. At least get something out there, get the common denominator out there. And even you're not going to get 100% buy-in with the common denominator, but get it out there so that something's out there. And so that's usually how things get pushed through earlier than, or get pushed through on time, is because there are concessions both ways. And that's what's happening now with the bills in Congress, which is through and it's called reconciliation process. And then there's also a process to get it past what is anticipated to be lack of Republican support, so you can get it through the Senate, appropriately enforce it through.
So there's another question that came in this week, or actually yesterday, via email, and this is from Kyra. This is about the whole vaccine thing. And then it looks like we've exhausted that topic, and then we'll go on to other questions about PPP and tax, et cetera. But this one was an interesting one. She said, thanks for taking the lead on addressing and navigating some of these real questions that real people and companies have. I've got an additional question if there's room. What happens to people who get reactions that permanently impede their bodies after the first round of vaccines and don't want to jeopardize their bodies for more by getting the second vaccine? How will employers, politicians, and medical communities handle that? Maybe not the right form, but just curious. I mean, again, speculation, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that is, and we've talked about that before, which is, okay, you are now in order, if this is one perspective, in order for me to live, to make money, to do what I have been trained to do, and I've been doing for you company and people for 20 years. I have to now inject myself with an experimental drug. I mean, and I'm not advocating any position. I'm just expressing so what some people have said, which is, and I get it. I mean, it's a valid, it's like, okay, it's the vaccines are not fully approved pursuant to the normal process of approval. They've been rushed through in an emergency fashion, and they got to a point where, okay, well, it works, seems to work. Yeah, it's working. And then we're building the database of success on a second by second, minute by minute, day by day basis versus having a whole history of information. I think that one of the dilemmas that we face as parents is we've made a decision for our children, for our minor children. What is the impact going to be? I mean, we're making the best for those who have, my kids are vaccinated. They're fortunate, I think, as teenagers to be eligible to get the vaccination, but we struggled with that, and we looked into the science of it, what little we have of it. And, I actually apologized to my kids before they got the vaccination. I said, we're doing the best that we can do for you guys as parents, but, there's a possibility this may have an effect down the road. But what we feel now is like, this is the best course to protect you right now. And so, and we're doing it too. So we're right there in there with us, all for one for all. So, that is, I think, a significant issue that you're forcing somebody and you're telling them you have to do something. The flip side of that is, well, if you don't like it, and Adam said this a little while ago, if you don't like it, then don't work here. Go somewhere else where they're not forcing you to do this. So, it's not as if your skill set can't be applied elsewhere, or you can go do something else and make money. So we're not putting you out on the street by you making a voluntary decision to not get vaccinated. Now, the question that you asked was a little different, which is, okay, I did it, I got vaccinated, and now I got sick. Okay. So two perspectives. One is, well, you didn't have to get that shot. You chose to get that shot. The after effects are your problem and not mine. Okay. But I got shot up because it was a requirement for work. So shouldn't my insurance cover it? Isn't it a workers' comp claim? So all those things come into play. It's kind of like driving a company vehicle outside of company hours on your way home and something happens versus driving it during the day for company business. Okay. Whose problem is it? Is it the company's insurance policy, or is it you personally because you went to a bar and had a drink, even though it may not have impacted you, but you had a drink and then, something happened, scratched a car or something like that. So again, very sorry to make it a more complex answer, but it's really a complex question that it can't be easily answered and is going to be litigated for a very long period of time, because it gets litigated, then it gets appealed, and then you get, does it rise all the way up to the Supreme Court? And then you have everybody weighing in. You have the insurance industry, you have the pharmaceutical industry, you have, everybody who basically has to protect their rear end jumps into the fray to make sure that they're not the ones that are contributing to the pot of money that has to go to people who were injured by the vaccine. So, and again, not mean to be cynical, but I mean, that's just kind of the way it happens.
Yes, that's really true. Comment from Rich: talk about a prisoner's dilemma. Yeah, that's pretty much it. As if running a business wasn't hard enough, throw a pandemic and then throw all kinds of crazy governmental things. Interestingly enough, this is a question that's timely based on yesterday, 9/15 extension deadline for companies. With 9/15 behind us, so this is before we get into more of the other questions, this one's a good one from Robert. I knew we could count on you, Robert. Did North Carolina ever make the PPP income tax exempt, those deductions?
No, it's still running through the budget process, which hopefully will be tracking towards the end of the month.
All right. So speaking of PPP, while we're on that, then we'll move into some of these other questions that have come in. This is from Scott, our friend in Hawaii. Thank you again for the crazy shirt. And Jack will be sporting his at some point, and so will Adam. But hope this email finds you safe and healthy. Would like your perspective on a discussion I've been having with my bank on usage of the 3508 easy form versus using the 3508 standard form. I'm of the opinion that I can use the 3508 easy form again in PPP round 2 as I used for forgiveness in PPP round 1. Here's my thought process. Round 1 application, I attested I was unable to operate at the same level as the state of Hawaii and California issued stay-at-home orders during my covered period. Both loans were given forgiveness using the easy form. And then he gives the exact attestation on the easy form. He said PPP2 the language after the and is identical to what I attested to in PPP round 1, except for it reads between March 1, 2020 and the last day of covered period. In my interpretation of this sentence is I can rely on executive orders from the states from March 1, 2020 until the end of my covered period in 2021, as I did in PPP 1. Questions are, do you feel this rationale is valid? Or 2, would you recommend filing the 3508 standard application just to be conservative? Would appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, all indications are they're trying to make this application for forgiveness process even easier than the first round process. So I would have thought still the easy form, because, in general, you're attesting that you were impacted, but you couldn't even qualify unless you were impacted. So I definitely would be doing the easy form.
I would say yes to both, meaning that I agree that the easy form is the way that this should go down. However, if I understood the comment and question correctly, you have a gatekeeper that is in control of your destiny. And if that gatekeeper is saying you can't use the easy form, you might be forced to go the long route rather than the short route. So, for practical purposes, even though you may be in the right, you may be stopped from getting your money by protesting. If it's just a matter of, it's a longer form. So it may be not worth the headache of resisting if I understood the question correctly or the comment correctly.
Well, and if that doesn't work, and if you're not willing to just give up the ghost yet, you just tell them Adam Boatsman said, this is what I'd do.
Yeah. Let me know how it goes for you.
All right. This question came in from CJ, whose son is recovering from the crud at UNC Chapel Hill. This is regarding paid leave tax credit. This is an interesting one. I have employees asking about the tax credit. All full-time employees receive at a minimum 120 hours of PTO a year. 2 employees were out with COVID-like symptoms and were paid for the time that they were out as they used PTO time. Both get 200 hours a year. That's good. They're requesting that we apply for the tax credit so they can have their PTO time back to use for vacation. That would be 7 weeks off in a year paid. That's even better. Is this what the tax credit is intended for? And if so, do we have to comply with the employee's request?
Well, the tax credit was originally intended for you to still have the capability to pay people when you otherwise would not have. So in this particular question, you paid the people anyway, so you had the opportunity to get the credit. Therefore, I think it's more around, what would you there? So is there a legal obligation for you to give them more time off? Absolutely not. from the way the credit's designed. It sounds like a case where the employee is saying, well, look, it's free to you. Why don't you give me 2 weeks off? Because I couldn't control the fact that I got COVID-like symptoms. I really would like to still be able to take a vacation. Thank you very much. I think that's just more of a judgment call. We kind of, our equivalent version of this is when we have a pregnancy and maternity leave. Kind of what's the right answer on that in terms of, offering some sort of benefit combined with, allowing the employee to still take a vacation so they don't feel completely burned out. And I think this is one of those cases where there's no legal requirement to do anything. So it's going to be a judgment call of what do you think is going to be the right thing to do based on, your employees and your culture. And I really don't have an opinion on that because I can see it both ways.
What's our legal expert say? You agree?
No comment. I am punting to people who know much more than me in that arena. I'm outside the arena looking into that one.
All right, cool. Along the same lines, Toinette just asked, are we allowed to have different PTO payout allowances and rules for employees who are vaccinated versus employees who are not vaccinated?
Jack, I'm going to stall for time. So you can think of what your answer is here. I haven't had this particular question come up, but if you look to what's happening in the employer market, one, I think it was Delta Airlines, if I'm not mistaken. It was one of the airlines basically said, look, if you're not vaccinated, same thing they did with smokers. If you're a non-smoker, you pay less for insurance than if you're smoking. So there was a tax. I don't know if it's the same airline or not, but one of the airlines basically had an unvaccinated tax, which represented, if you're not going to get vaccinated, you need to pay more for your healthcare plan, because the theory being that you're going to have more healthcare costs than a vaccinated person. So in this particular instance, I didn't have that question, but I did have a client that asked, what do you do about someone who, not judging vaccinated versus unvaccinated, but like, well, hey, I'm unvaccinated. I don't believe in masks. And by the way, I just went to spring break in Florida and I was not socially distant hanging out with, 9 million of my other COVID friendly buddies. Then comes back with COVID and says, oh, by the way, I need my paid PTO, please. As an employer, that would piss me off.
Yeah.
So this person's question was, should I pay him or not pay him? Because I'm pissed off. And I was like, use your gut, Mike. Whatever you want to do is fine. But I totally see your point. So I don't know. I don't think there's other than what you're bound by under the Family Medical Leave Act, which is going to apply to 50 employees and above. I'm guessing there's probably not an issue with discrimination in PTO policies, unless Jack says something differently. I think where you have to be careful is like, you're kind of saying that, I don't know if you get a whole lot of value out of this, but like, if Gary said, hey, I'm unvaccinated, I've got, COVID, I don't pay him PTO, but then I call in and I say I'm vaccinated, but I'm like, I literally called in sick on Tuesday, I've got a cold. Why wouldn't Gary just say I've got a cold and I don't have COVID? In other words, it's almost like you'd have to say, well, go show your positive COVID test result, so then I can not pay you PTO. Versus Gary's just sick, that it's the same as me being sick and I'm vaccinated. So I don't know. What do you think, Jack?
So that would require me to run down to one of my employment law partners' offices to get the actual answer. But similar, I don't think that there is a mechanism in place that would necessarily allow you to say yes or no to denying PTO. I mean, PTO is usually a contractual arrangement between an employee and an employer. And so, it's like they're sick, even though they brought it upon themselves. I mean, it's like, okay, well, you didn't get the flu shot and you got the flu. And so, and I've heard that argument as well. It's like, okay, well, why, am I not going to allow you to use PTO because you have the flu because you didn't go get the flu shot? So, but I think practically speaking, that, yeah, it's like, hey, I'm not feeling well, and you don't have to really report why. But usually that gets back around to the person in charge, right? Okay, yeah, they get, but I also think that there is a more important reason to self-report and not create an environment of hesitation and non-disclosure, which is that if somebody did something dumbass, as you described, which is put themselves in a position of going into a cesspool of COVID without being vaccinated and then brought it back, I even though that was a dumb thing to do to protect coworkers that are here that may be unvaccinated as well. So there's a couple people in our shop that are just, for various reasons, medical reasons, whatever it may be, are very careful when they're not vaccinated. They would want to know and maybe stay away. And so it's those kind of things that you need to weigh. What is more important? So are you going to create an environment where people are hesitant to be truthful and then potentially expose others in your office? Or are you going to say, well, okay, that was a bonehead thing to do, but I'm not going to create that environment so that people will come and be truthful when they're exposed to it without being self-conscious about it or fearing retaliatory or reprimanding consequences.
Here's an interesting question that just came in on this kind of related topic, and I won't disclose the name, but it's a really great question. If we can't enforce return to work, it's extremely hard to track if the person working from home is actually working or not. I heard stories that some people are doing 2 or more jobs. What can the employer legally do to ensure the employee is loyal and actually working a minimum of 8 hours a day without us getting screwed over?
Yeah. So again, I'll stall for time, Jack, for you. So all I can tell are anecdotal stories. We've had clients, and I'm assuming that this is legal, but we've had clients that have put on monitoring software on people's computers and just to see what they're doing. And some employees have gotten really creative. Like there's a software, I think it's called like Mouse Click, that will just randomly do stuff on your screen. So this client of ours was like, look, this is so blatantly obvious. The logs showed that they downloaded and installed this Mouse Click software. And then we saw it start. And then we saw it just randomly moving around the screen to show activity. One of our employees, when she worked for another CPA firm, did the same thing. And they saw that, look, when they monitored the guy's software, they found that he just opened up a PDF document, looked at it, but otherwise was just day trade the whole day.
No.
So I think your concern is a real thing. And I think, from what I understand, it's your computer, you own it. So you might have a different story if it's their own personal computer that they're using from work. But, we've had clients that, I'm assuming they're not in legal jeopardy, but have monitored people's computer activity to see what they're actually doing, which to me is no different than if I'm in the construction business and I slap a GPS on a truck. There's a reason I freaking do that. It's to make sure my guys are showing up to the job site instead of doinking around all day long, like they use that stuff religiously to see if people are working. The computer monitoring software is just our white collar version of the GPS tracking device, in my opinion.
So yeah, the dilemma of truthfulness in the workplace, right? And so, I think about the same things, and we have had clients do things, and it's measure, okay, put the software on the computer, countermeasure, put software like that on there, countermeasure to the countermeasure. Well, make them type in a code that shows up on the screen and someone has to physically type it. So like the robots that you have to, I am not a robot or whatever on certain sites. So it does go back and forth. A couple of concepts. So we do not allow anyone to access our systems unless they are on a company issued computer or they go through a certain process. And so that process that they use for their own computers obviously keeps track of what's going on with that person accessing our system, because basically what you're doing is you're remote controlling a piece of the server from your own personal computer. You've been granted access into this area. So we know what has been happening, what people have been doing or not doing. Now, and people have installed software on the cameras and say you have to, have it open. You have to be on video calls. You have to actually turn the video on when you're on conference calls and hiding yourself so that we don't know what you're doing, kind of thing. And we also, and they look for things. They're like, okay, is there movement? Is it like on a loop? You're always moving the same pattern, and you're here and now you're here and here. And so it's a little bit comical, but the reality is that we don't know, and you just have to hopefully have trusted employees. Sometimes I wonder when things go into a black hole, it's like, okay, what's happening? But the reality is that I don't know. We have legal assistants who work for several attorneys, so they may be working on other stuff, and you just have to be somewhat trusting. But if you have suspicions, it's your property. If they're using a computer or they've agreed to that access, or just don't give them remote access unless they're on a computer and they know. The phones that we use, this is a personally paid for iPhone, but it has Big Brother all over it. And at any point in time, our IT group, if I call them up and say, I think my phone got stolen, they push a button, it wipes the phone, no matter where it is, no matter if it's off or on, because as soon as it comes back on, it's going to wipe it. And I have given my consent to that in order to be able to use. And you know what they said when people resisted that? They said, well, we said, then get your own phone, and get your own number, and you use that one instead of your personal phone if you're worried about it. So we're giving you the convenience of, now with associates, we subsidize their phone use. So that way they don't have to get two phones, but for partners, it's, you make a choice. So you're the employer and you make choices, and again, trusting, but potentially validate and verify if you need to.
Yeah. At the end of the day, hire adults, expect adult-like behavior, and look at what they're actually producing. So those are all good indicators. Couple more questions here. Guys, should we consider married filing separately to avoid the $1 million plus penalty?
No, because the limitations are going to be reduced based on in other words, you can't, like, married filing jointly is going to have one limit, and then married filing separately single is going to have another limit, and there'll be some harm. Like, it's very hard to game the system on that strategy. So I wouldn't plan on that for now.
All right, good question. Next question. What changes were proposed on SALT deductions? So for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's state and local tax.
So it was silent on the SALT deduction, but there's been some ballyhoo saying we'll address it as part of the reconciliation process. Some are saying they'll just double the exemption up to 20 grand. Others have said, hey, we'll give a full restoration of the ability to deduct everything. So, stay tuned. One would expect that there'll be a little bit of movement on it, but it wasn't in the House Ways and Means proposal.
Well, this has been a good one. Lots of really good questions. You know, we had about 45 people on live today, which was great. Knowing especially that we're still dealing with a lot of speculation, but there's a lot of heat. I was talking with a friend of mine who runs a company in Cape Town, South Africa yesterday. And just, you know, talking with him, you know, crime is up 60% there. And it's hard as a business owner anytime, but man, there's a lot of upheaval and craziness, crazy shirts. But one of the things that and they're dealing with a lot of the same things that we are here, which is like the vaccine mandates, the polarization of the extreme views. And he said one of the best anecdotes, or I guess just thought starters, the way that he approaches it, because it's so polarizing. He says, with regard to the vaccines, are you a vaccine or are you a specialist in this area? And no one is, right? And he goes, I'm not either. And he said, the experts, the virologists and the medical experts are even at opposing sides on that. If they can't agree, how are we going to be convinced that we are certain when we're not an expert? I thought, that's a really good approach, because we're still figuring it out. I mean, we're still figuring it out. There are pros and cons on both sides. So hopefully this has been helpful. Gosh, you know, if the government didn't keep changing and lobbing hand grenades underneath our desk chairs, we wouldn't have meaning for and reason for us to do this every week, I guess, you know. So I'm going to be thankful that I get to see Adam and Jack every week and hopefully help you guys as we're trying to all navigate this together. And speaking of navigating, next week, I think I'm going to be navigating up through to Ohio to be at a board meeting. So Jack and Adam, you guys are going to be on your own without me, unless something happens and there's a COVID exposure and then we have to do it remotely, then I won't have to drive up to Ohio. But
yeah, we'll count on you.
Oh, hey, Twinette's got another one here. Did you discuss anything related to mandates for business related to vaccines for employers with businesses less than 100 employees to provide services for children with Medicaid? We did not specifically go into businesses under 100, but Jack or Adam, you want to address that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where the reason why they chose 100 is they think, well, again, Jack theory, that it will impact not as many people, but I just, you know, as I said, I think the number was 2/3 of the country's workforce anticipated to be impacted by this. So, but it doesn't change, you know, there's other standards that are at 50 employees, as you know, and so it doesn't change those things necessarily and needs to be congruent with or consistent with those other programs that are already in place. But I am not aware of, and we've been focusing on 100 plus, kind of thinking, well, okay, they're not going to push on the 99 and less employees, but pursuant to some of the comments that I shared with you earlier, that the 100 is aggregate, not just, you can't say, well, haha, I only have 60 over here and 50 over here at this facility. It's now, you're now over 100, so it does apply to you.
Yeah, speaking of that, I whether it's right or wrong is not my place to judge, but somebody that was really upset about it said, well, I'm going to split my company into separate companies and have make sure everybody's below 100. And I'm thinking, well, you could do that, but they may start it at 100. They may start going down too. Who knows? You know?
Yeah, just that won't work. I mean, that's like the same, you know, hey, I'm going to avoid the Affordable Care Act by, you know, breaking up. They have control group rules that basically say, look, I mean, if you've got common control, then you're stuffed. You got no choice.
Yeah, I think that's where this is going to go, which is when we actually get the writing of what this standard is, it's going to have definitions in there, and it's going to address all of these things, because as Adam said, the feds and state governments have addressed this in other areas, and they're just going to basically apply the same control group rules to this situation as well. So you're not going to be able to circumvent that.
Got another question that came in. Jack, does the president have the authority to mandate the vaccine for Medicare and or Medicaid recipients? If so, is that in the plans to occur?
In theory, yes. But it's not like, he's the commander in chief, so he can do certain things, and just the military has to follow orders, which is a whole nother issue with the whole bombshell about going behind the back of President Trump and going and talking to China officials, et cetera, which I thought was very interesting and dramatic. But so it's yes, but there is a process, regulatory process, that will end. If that happens, that it will end up in the courts, just like everything else does. And you're going to have advocates within the government taking sides. So you're going to have, people, whether it's the agencies versus the legislative agencies versus the enforcement agencies, et cetera. So there's going to be a lot of infighting, but also external clashes between between all interested parties externally outside of the government as well.
Man, great questions today. Spirited conversation. So hopefully we've helped people. We've gone a little bit over what we normally do. So thank you everybody for joining us. If anybody joined us late, we will put this up on the BGW CPA YouTube channel this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Jack, it's good to have you back in the Queen City. And in one piece. And Adam, I hope you get over the whatever they call it, that crud from UNC Chapel Hill. Evidently that's not going around Duke. I don't know what the deal is. Maybe drinking out of that standard fountain. Chapel Hill.
Well, I have to say though, Granville is still the place to be at UNC.
That's
and
right.
It has been for decades.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's their logo or motto.
Cool. I'm just a simple guy from Kansas State, man. So I don't know. We didn't have anything fancy like that. We just had cattle pens. I'm just kidding. All right. Well, you guys have a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the week. Thanks for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you next week, or at least you'll see Jack and Adam next week. Take care, y'all.
Thank you.
All right. See ya.